Okay, so it's officially 2:05. We're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Adira Chanat. I am the Development and Programs Associate here at 12 Gates, and it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to be sitting in the gallery this summer with this amazing exhibition that we're here to talk about today, the Beetroot Robe. So just to make sure you're in the right place, this is 333 Steps, conversation with Qasim Riza Shaheen and Alpesh Kantilal Patel. So before we get started, I'm gonna just give you a quick rundown of the event. So we'll start with some introductions. And so after I introduce the speakers, we'll move into a kind of free-form conversation between the artist, Qasim Riza Shaheen, and Alpesh Patel. And afterwards, this conversation will involve a virtual tour of the gallery that's a little bit interactive, so that'll be great. And then we'll move into opening the conversation up to the audience. So if you have any questions, feel free to chat them, and like us, the moderators, will make sure to ask those questions, or you can raise your hand and we can just unmute you and you can go ahead and ask a question. So without further ado, I'll read a little bit about the exhibition. So this is the Beetroot Robe, and crooning with a deep longing from its gut, the Beetroot Robe forages a passageway to self-love through the wilderness of aging, queerness, and gender. Its shard-like visual narratives evoke the symbiotic duality of queer love as an acceptance of others through the self and the self through others. Using color, video, spoken word, and textile manipulation, Shaheen reflects and relates the experiences of desire, yearning, and belonging upon one another, stitching together a house of mirrors that searches in its visitor for a true reflection. Qasim Riza Shaheen is a British artist and writer based in Manchester, working across participatory performance, installation, film, and photography. Shaheen's practice explores memory, notions of beauty, sexuality, love, and more broadly, fundamental concerns about human nature. Alpesh Kantilal Patel is an associate professor of contemporary art and visual culture at Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University, and a lead faculty member at the Chautauqua School of Art's summer residency program in New York. His art historical scholarship, and criticism reflect his queer, anti-racist, and transnational approach to contemporary art. And finally, before we dive in, I just want to say quickly that I'm so excited for these two people to be in conversation. I think it's going to be really exciting. And a special shout out to Qasim, who's here abroad, and technically he's logging in at 2 a.m. So big thanks to him for being willing to stay up late and discuss beautiful art. And finally, I can't start without acknowledging that the land that 12 Gates stands on is Lenape land, and words really fall short of the direct action we need for the liberation, land sovereignty, and self-determination owed to Indigenous people worldwide and Lenape people here. So acknowledging this, recognizing this, 12 Gates humbly offers our work of uplifting the cultural production of displacement, of migration, of diaspora as an offering to the Lenape people, past and present, and Indigenous people worldwide who are living in their homelands and in the diaspora. So without further ado, I'll kick it off to Alpesh and Qasim. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Qasim, thank you for this gift of an exhibition that you have put here for us to experience. It'll be fun to talk about some of the various things that came into my head when experiencing it last week. And I think that's maybe one thing I should say right away, that for those of you that haven't seen the exhibition, that there's an experiential quality to it. The color of red, various kinds of reds and pinks, really has an impact, I think, on you as you're going through the exhibition. And maybe, Qasim, you can talk a little bit about color and how that functions in your work. Maybe in the first group of works on paper where you have the text as a starting point.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and for being here. I think before we do anything, I think it's really important just to acknowledge the strange times that we're living in. I think we're collectively in something together which we really need to acknowledge. I mean, there's been so much loss of life and suffering and displacement and pain and lots of inequities of our social lives that sort of come into play as well. And certainly we can see that unfold in front of us. And of course, the last 1.5 years has been extremely difficult for all of us at varying degrees. So I think it's important to recognize that before I even start to talk about the work. But it's also related to the work in the sense that it was born out of that experience of introspection, this collective introspection that we've been going through. All of us in our own ways have been delving into our own narratives, our own archives, our own thinking, our memorabilia, our artifacts, all the things that we keep close to us, which remind us of who we are. And this exhibition really is a testimony to the stories that we embody and the stories then we share in return with one another for some sort of affirmation or for some kind of acknowledgement that we also exist. So yeah, that's kind of where it's all coming from, and I think it's important to put that out there anyway. The exhibition is very much balancing between temporality and longevity. And when I started thinking about this exhibition, I thought about it as an illustrated children's book. So other than being an artist and a writer, my other avatar is I'm a primary school teacher, and stories furnish our day, and stories which help us navigate, through the day, allow us to think critically and compassionately about the world we live in, and think about inclusivity and all of those things, but also about the kind of stories we tell our young learners and our children. So I started out really thinking about this in terms of publication, physical kind of book, this illustrated book or a short animation film. So because it was born out of that, I wanted to investigate the idea of paper being very temporal, very fragile, something which is, recycled, disposed, and then embroidery, which is associated with longevity and hours of kind of painstakingly putting something together. And I wanted to put those things, and see what happens. And usually when embroidery is done, there's always kind of a paper backing, and I was always interested in that paper backing and what happens to that paper. And so that was kind of the idea of writing that story on different hues and different shades of pink.
I'm actually glad you mentioned the genesis of this, because I feel like one of the more powerful elements of my experience last week when I saw the exhibition was that there was a sense that it was propelling me to entangle myself with the world. When so many things are telling me the opposite right now, that was a very interesting message. And when I say entanglement, I'm really talking about the video pieces that you have.
Yeah.
One can actually listen to others narrate the story that's on the wall that, of a paper piece that you just described. And there's a sense that you're sort of, in between the person actually reciting a version of the story and you. And all of us are kind of in that moment kind of intertwined. I'm curious what you think about that idea with that particular piece.
Yeah, I mean, that was really a very moving process for me. I started out writing this story to hear it in somebody else's voice. So it was never really intended to read it myself or to hear myself read it. It was very much about giving the story to somebody else and to understand and feel the texture of that person's voice, the intonation, the rhythm, the kind of vocal variation, the emphasis in certain words, that kind of play of pace and rhythm. And it's called Kathak. And I really feel that it does punctuate in the way that a Kathak repertoire would, you know, the sort of the stillness and the pauses and the persona of the dancer, negotiating constantly with the technique and with the repertoire itself. So for me, it sort of worked on so many different levels in terms of the listening, the kind of the audible quality of the piece. And the other thing is, this work could not have been done if it wasn't for the contribution of such beautifully diverse voices. And I'm so grateful for these voices who have read this, who have inhabited my little story, my little world, and populated it with their beings. And I sort of mean that quite sincerely. I mean, it started out initially as an open invitation, sort of an outreach, kind of a community outreach initiative. It was about bringing people into the gallery in some way, engaging with the work, but then it also then started to transform for me, where I was, I wanted to acknowledge people who had affected me and had shaped my thinking, who had given me so many opportunities to make work, people who had journeyed with me on a personal level, people who had inspired me. And I wanted to reach out and ask them and say, would you graciously read this story? And I was so moved by the fact that everybody did. And also there's friends of friends, there are also this beautiful kind of lineage. There's 3 generations of readers, and the youngest one 6 years old and read it so beautifully and really kind of resonated with me, because that was who I was writing the story for, you know, for young learners. And so that for me was quite rewarding, I think, when I was listening to this archive just grow over the last 3 months. And this is on Instagram on the Beetroot Robe, and all these voices are there. And in so many languages, and this active translation as well, which a lot of readers sort of shared with me afterwards and said, you know, it was bringing them closer to their own language and in a way that they weren't engaging with their own mother tongue in that way. And it kind of forced them to kind of have that sort of introspective thing happening around language and use of language, and when and how we use certain words and phrases and how we translate. And that was something.
It was interesting to hear, you know, when people paused, what word they emphasized and how that could completely change the meaning of what one was listening to. And to the point, like I went home and then went on Instagram, and I mean, I was just like, oh my gosh, like there's all these stories. There's a multiplicity of stories. So what started out for me going into this gallery and having this personal engagement through the works on paper with the story kind of slowly unfolded and became much more social than I think I would have imagined. And I'd encourage everyone to go onto Instagram and participate, or just listen. Listening is participating as well, I think. It's quite a twist that I wasn't expecting with the work in some way.
I think that interchangeability occurred for me as well. I mean, I work a lot with self-portraiture, but these voices reformulated and created these portraits, and the idea of being present, it was that I wanted to be present. I wanted to listen. to these stories. So the story is not necessary. I'm not the protagonist of the story. I am a listener, and I wanted to kind of I wanted to be the receiver of that story, and witness those shifts in characterization and the sort of idiosyncrasies of speaking, and all of those things.
I did want to mention and talk about the self-portraiture because that's a ruse too. Like when I first saw it, right, it's I think I'm seeing you, but eventually over time I realized I'm not seeing you at all. Like it's a screen of some kind. It made me really think a lot about the writing of Edward Glissant, who is really the only post-colonial theorist that writes very kind of happily about the possibility of there being an interconnected world. And when he does that, he says that the only way that's going to happen is if everyone has a right to opacity. And by that, he means this sense of not having to share everything or withholding. And I thought in a very strange way, actually, your portrait was very much that. Like it might appear at first as this kind of transparent representation, but over time it's actually quite the opposite, which is quite lovely to, again, I think, understand as I was experiencing those particular pieces. I'm curious if you've looked at Edward Glissant at all, like that theorist, because I know that you know a lot about theory,
Yes, I mean, to be honest, my practice was born out of theory. I think one of my very early engagements with live art practice was through Frantz Fanon and through post-colonial theory, and but for me, I really think it, without wanting to go into dense conversations about that, but I think for me it's really about telling stories, sharing stories, and thinking about what we put into those stories, and how we furnish them, how we populate them, and us and as sites of narration. I think a lot about just that simple act of giving and throwing back everything that we collect in our lives back into the world, because you sort of come to a point in life when you gather and you gather and you gather, whether that's knowledge, whether that's tangible things, whatever it is, we're constantly in this process of gathering and collecting, and then we get to a stage where we want to rid and we want to curate and recurate our lives, and then we want to throw back everything so that we feel lighter, because those things are no longer necessary. They don't define us anymore, or somehow we have journeyed around them and through them, and we've come to a new place. And I think we get fooled a lot by desire, and we spend our lives in the pursuit of desire, and we're always thinking that desire has to be fulfilled. We have to fulfill this desire, this urge, but I don't think that's always the case, and I don't think it has to be. I think we need to do a little bit of unlearning around what that means. Not all desire is worth pursuing or nurturing or taking any further, or maybe it is, but it's not necessarily your fit. And you're looking here and you're looking there, and you're trying to find fragments, or you're trying to find that particular kind of hue that fits you, and then you start to recognize that actually that wasn't even what I wanted in the first place, and that kind of resonates with the story itself.
That is a lovely way of thinking about desire. I don't think I've ever heard it put like that. The idea of not worrying about the object of the desire, like the end point, and somehow kind of being immersed in that the middle area on some level, which is really
and our obsession with trying to embody desire as well, give it a shape, give it a form, you know, in a glass bottle, in a bird's wing. We're constantly trying to have a form for desire, and then desire can be disembodied. It can be something which need not be related to, you know, the physical form, and it can be something else. And I think that's where I think the play lies within the text, because you know, it gives you a lot of signifiers. It gives you lots of symbolism which you would find in parables and fairy tales and stories of a prince. And you know, you think about an old man, although seldom described as beautiful. And for me, that was really important, because I think we start to disappear as we age, and we disappear internally, we disappear externally. We, you know, as we age, we become less relevant, or perhaps the things that appeal to us become less relevant. I think it works both ways, but ultimately, I think we do work towards a state of invisibility. Naturally, we do want to withdraw, and I think desire kind of meets me in that place somewhere of not being in a form.
So that's interesting. So in a way, maybe when I was talking about how, you know, the space was this experiential one coming into the gallery, that all the works were modulating my desire, you know, constantly changing and shifting, never sort of becoming, never realized, all the way to the point when I got home, was looking at Instagram. And maybe that's how the color is functioning, in a way, that it's modulating our desire, maybe, you know, letting us see it in a different way than we're used to seeing it. And I'm just really, I know, I just am so touched and fascinated also by your discussion of longevity and aging in your work. I mean, you know, the contemporary art world is one that is very much about the now, the young. Those conversations don't really come up that much.
There is, absolutely. There is a whole drive towards, you know, finding and, you know, discovering new talent and emerging, and absolutely that is so vital. But what I really appreciate about 12 Gate Arts and Atif and Aisha as curators, as programmers, as directors, is that they have a nurturing relationship with their artists. They're not just interested in a show, they're interested in friendships, they're interested in you know, that longevity of a relationship. My last show at 12 Gates was over 10 years ago, but you know, they remembered, and they wanted to reach out, and they continuously reached out to see how I am, on a very human level, you know, and then to offer a space to me in a climate which is very risky for a commercial gallery. I mean, it's difficult for everybody, but to bring work into a space which is non-linear, which is experimental, I mean, whatever. I mean, I don't want to put words to you know, that what I'm trying to say is that it's not easily definable. You know, it's not something that can be necessarily sold, you know, to put it quite bluntly. It may not, but I don't think that was really a concern. And I really respect that, because curatorially, they allowed this very organic show. They trusted me. The trust was very central to this relationship. And that was one of the motivations for me to make a show, because I hadn't, the last piece of work I did was for the Asia Triennial in 2018. And then there was a gap. Like I said, I'm a full-time primary school teacher, and that keeps me very happily busy. But I did want to, you know, make a piece of work again, and they let that happen, and I'm very appreciative of that.
It's a very unusual gallery for sure. And it would be nice if there were more galleries quite like this.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. They're so passionate. They're so passionate about the artists they work with. And there's a real they nurture a sense of community. They're engaging with the communities around them as well, but also just maintaining a relationship, which is so important.
Right. And I've had a similar experience with them as well. And it's actually great that you brought that element up. You know, sometimes we think of artworks just happening outside of the white cube, outside of the relationship with the people that are connected to the gallery. But here you're kind of talking about how actually all of that is a little messy.
Yeah.
In a good way, in a productive way, that it's messy.
You see, I've worked in the arts for around 25 years. And the most transformative experience I've had in my life has been becoming a primary school teacher. That has been the most transformative experience. It has absolutely and utterly changed my outlook to the way that we conduct ourselves, the way we speak to each other, the way we communicate, and that huge level of responsibility towards the next generation, but in a very real way, in a very messy way, in a way which is not as curated or doesn't have creative ownership or control and all of these things. You're not trying to put yourself out there and be found or be commissioned. This is real life. You know, every single lesson, every single class that I teach, it's the whole world. It's everything. It's everything. And that is what I mean about that transformative experience. Those are real lives. What we say, the stories we tell, the manner in which we tell them, our biases, the fact that we have to keep our privilege in check all the time. We have to think about all those entitlements that we take for granted, and we bring them back into this space. And I think a lot of that is lost in the art world. I think the art world is extremely, at times, extremely egocentric and not, again, forgive me for my generalization here, but it's just my personal experience, because everything is driven around the idea of you and your work. And yes, I've been personally very, in terms of the way I made work, I was working with people, and I was trying to constantly negotiate that space that I shared with somebody when I was making work. So I was very aware of the power dynamics. I was aware of the politics of representation. And I really struggled with that as an artist as well for so many years, trying to find that equity, and who has the right to tell whose stories. And how do and I'm using a term which I wasn't thinking when I was making work itself, the idea of autoethnography, the idea of becoming the other, which one is me, which one is you. And my whole work is sort of centered around that kind of that space between two people, where, we don't know. We just don't know what that space is. Is it yours? Is it mine? Am I you? Are you me? And I've done that, but I still think somewhere along that, not necessarily in my making of the work, but then when it gets programmed, or if it gets funded, or when it's seen, and which biennial it gets seen at, then lots of things come into play. Things like, which passport do you have? What's your nationality? What's your ethnicity? Are you authentically Pakistani, or are you British Pakistani? Or where are you really from? And that kind of, the politics around who gets seen and what gets seen, I was just really not. Life is vast. There's just so much to do. And I think to get yourself so roped into that whole thing, when your intention initially was just to make work, to communicate ideas, to break down barriers, to break down those walls and the hierarchy of community and gallery, then to get kind of roped back into the politics of, you know, where you get seen and who shows you, I think that was a bit redundant for me. And I think that's, you know, that's why I think I say that it's been a transformative experience. My learners have taught me so much. Bless them.
Wonderful that you talk about teaching and what an impact it has made on your work and your life.
Yeah.
And also because you're modeling a different kind of, I think, artist too. One who does lots of different things, one who teaches, and you know that sometimes again, like there's a cleaving of the artist from the rest of the world and other kinds of activities, and so it's refreshing to kind of hear you talk so passionately about it and to bring it into this conversation on art, something I wouldn't have expected. And boy, what it would have been like to have you as my teacher. I wanted to share something because I thought this was just amazing. It's in an interview in a book of yours called The Last Known Pose. And I was like, wow, this helps me understand this exhibition in a way where you define queer and how you're queer. And I just want to read this out, and I'm curious, you know, if you feel the same way and how you think any of these might connect to the exhibition. I have my own sort of ideas. But here we go. Sort of number one, because I don't allow anything to fit me and the movement between surfaces is what matters. Number two, because I don't stop searching different truths. Number three, because I love durationality. Number four, because in the shadows, I learn uninhibited choreographies. And number five, because I believe nothing lasts and forever is also on a timeline. You know, I mean, and none of that has to do with orientation or sexuality. It's a very kind of classic way of, I think, looking at what queerness can be. But you've articulated so beautifully, and I feel like they connect to your exhibition, this idea of durationality, for instance, and tempo and time, which are different at different points in this exhibition. There's the time, I think, like for me, just again, going to this exhibition, there's my time reading those texts first, for instance, and really kind of wanting to own it and interpret it. And then there's going to the, you know, the sort of the iPads and listening. And now I'm listening to someone else's time. I'm on their rhythm and not necessarily my own. So there's interesting kind of moments like that in the exhibition. And I mean, could you talk a little bit more about that temporality? Like you mentioned it earlier.
Well, first of all, it's really important to say that I've always been somebody else's queer. I've always been an academic's queer. I've been a programmer's queer. I've been a funder's queer. I've been queer because my differences or my outlook has appeared to be queer to the people who are looking at me. I myself am not queer. I don't really buy into that very, I think we all have an erotic intelligence. I think we have an emotional intelligence, every single one of us. I think somewhere, if we allow and give ourselves the permission to explore, to develop our vocabulary, our taste, then we can engage in many, many, many forms of love. But ultimately, it's about what you want, what the other person wants. It's about consent, and it's about respect, and it's about journeying together. I'm not that keen on identity politics when it comes to the whole alphabet soup of LGBTQ. And that's not negating, I'm just saying it's very, very Euro-American in its understanding. It's very much a homo-hetero-binary calculus. I think if we can just for 1 second forget the last 100 years and just start delving into sort of pre-colonial histories, but even before that, I just think there's centuries and centuries and centuries worth of material that we can be looking at, reflecting, reimagining, resurrecting, recreating. I don't think we need to call ourselves a sort of a catchphrase that, you know, fits all. I'm not. I mean, my work has been programmed in a lot of LGBTQ contexts, and I welcomed that, and that was completely fine because that's where the audience was, that's where the galleries were receptive to engage and understand and see my work. They felt that it was very homoerotic, or they felt that it was very, it was about same gender intimacy, it was about spirituality. And then I think it was all very much in the hands of the language in which my work was programmed. Why did I make work? Because I wanted to tell stories, because I love and I want to be loved, and I'm not scared of that word. And I think that process has been exciting for me, and that's what's kept me going, because at every stage of my life, this constant search for love, union, marriage, devotion, submission to something greater than what you embody, the physical being. I think that's really driven me. And of course, my practice has been heavily influenced by religiosity, by being a Muslim, by subscribing to a lot of Sufi thinking, certain South Asian Sufi orders that I'm very drawn to, music, dance, my relationship to my dance teacher for the last 20, 25, 23 years, for more than that. Those kind of relationships are the ones that have navigated me through my art practice. What hasn't navigated me is this search for, belonging to a particular group of people or a particular community or a particular politics, because I think we're all in flux. I think we're all changing. And I think I've allowed myself that permission not to be fixed into any particular thing.
I think it's great what you're saying. And I want to come back to just storytelling, because it was something I wanted to ask, but you've also brought it up a couple of different times. And I'm curious, is part of what is so exciting and attractive about this idea of storytelling is that there's always another story to tell. There's an element of fiction, and yet there's also a kind of truth. It's not clear where the truth and fiction kind of lie. I'm curious what you think about that, and maybe to just talk a little bit more about storytelling, since it seems so foundational to also your teaching.
Sure.
Yeah.
You see, I started out as a live artist, a performance artist. I was very body-based. It was all about the physical body. And obviously my work then started to look autobiographical. It started to look like, oh, the work is all about him. It's all about him. But actually, a dancer would not be questioned that way, because they're carrying somebody else's choreography, but they're working with their own body. But a performance artist, there's an assumption there that because they're doing it out of their own choice, because they're telling stories, and these stories appear intimate and personal, then it's going to be about that person. And my work has always been about the sort of the physical, the embodied, and how I can somehow become a mediator, or how I can become a reflector, or how I can carry those stories. Maybe not so much enacting them, but allowing myself to have a shared experience for a period of time. The work I did with communities in Lahore, or whichever community-based projects that I've done, it's in my trajectory, but it's about finding that middle ground. It's really, my work has never been explicitly about me or my life or my personal identity or my personal orientation, but there's been a lot of assumption, and those assumptions, they are very believable, they're very believable. If I'm talking about South Asia, well, I'm brown, so of course that's going to be authentic because he's brown, or he's androgynous, or he wears gender neutral clothing, or he's this, or he looks like this, so that means he must be queer, or there's a lot of assumptions about the way that we carry ourselves. And like I say, I've always been somebody else's queer. And that's really important to kind of talk about within the frame of this work as well, because I never, the word queer never even came in my mind. It was just really not even there when I was conceptualizing this, making this work. This work is about you. It's about how somebody takes a story and makes that story their own. It's about the pauses. It's about the intonations. It's about the vocal variation. It's about the shift in translation. It's about the emphasis on certain words. And it's about the pauses in between.
Do you think that, one issue is just the laziness of the way critics, your curators, et cetera, use language, as if it's known and fixed. It's because it's, so much of what you're in your exhibition, it surpasses certain kind of language. But I'm thinking about, if I'm writing about it, right, you have to be careful with those words and how you use them. And perhaps sometimes there's not enough thinking around that.
And as an educator, that's something that I think about every single day. As educators, as teachers, we are really listening to ourselves. Any good educator in a classroom is listening to themselves just as much as the learners, because everything we say is so ideologically loaded. Every word is coming from a certain place. We can't change that. We can't change we can't change the etymology of words. We can't really change the weight of those words. But what we can do is we can try to create a counter, we can create counter narratives. We can find a way of addressing things that are uncomfortable. And I think you're right. I think it is a lot of laziness that happened, certainly in terms of the way that some of my work has been received in the past. It was very conveniently South Asian. It was very conveniently queer. It was very conveniently, this, that, and the other. And at times, those were the last things on my mind. They were really not even things that I was thinking of. But those were the things that curators or programmers or funders or I won't say the viewers, because I don't know. I can't really speak about the people who actually, because I've had such an eclectic sort of range of feedback is what I'm trying to say. So from people who viewed the work, but I mean in terms of how it's situated and located, I think there's something there to think about.
I wanted to turn to the last group of works in the exhibition on the other side of the wall of the paperworks with text that are titled "But Nobody Ever Did." Talk about those works. I think those were the ones that mystified me, and I want to hear some more about what you were thinking.
I think the shawls, whether it's a worn shawl or Qasim's wedding shawl, or the series of miniature clothing is really a homage to gender atypical Sufi mystics. It's a homage to gender fluidity when we think about certain Sufi narratives, but also an acknowledgement of, men speaking for women, you know, which is a whole different thing to explore as well, and why and how that's happening, and then how are we understanding that, because we can very easily fall into a certain way of reading that. But I think, like I say, we have to find different ways of reading. We can't all just read in one particular kind of with one particular politic in mind. We have to sort of be aware of where are we bringing that? Where is that material coming from? I've had to actively unlearn my academic training, you know, through the 90s, you know, I have to unlearn all of that, you know, and reclaim it and reformulate and reconfigure it. And that's what I was doing with this work, was that I was creating, I was making work on dolls, and I had, you know, reconfigured many dolls, and I was finding, you know, dolls that had different body shapes, and then designing for those dolls. And I was thinking about animation and film, and initially the exhibition was very much going to be around these dolls that I had made in the studio, in suspended kind of positions of dance, but then it ended up just kind of becoming a series of those sari blouses, but there's a whole kind of ensemble of costumes. But that was, again, because I was initially thinking about illustrated publication, animation, film. I was thinking about those as potentially being a part of some kind of a film. So that, but of course, like I was saying, it's very much about acknowledging that gender play, you know, in gender atypicality. I wouldn't say queer, because I think, again, we're transporting terms, but I think certainly the idea of wearing women's clothes and dancing in order to, you know, to find a place of union with one's teacher or master, or however you want to term that. I think that's kind of where the fascination with clothes came. Also, what is, you know, this idea of longevity, that shawl will last longer than me. So we collect things, and we don't realize that the things that we hold so precious and so close to us have a longer lifespan than we do, than us. And we are very transient, and we are very fragile, and we are very temporal. But these things are left in, you know, in family heirlooms and things, and you find this shawl, and you find this, and, you know, think this is Qasim, you know, Qasim's wedding shawl, and of course it's not my wedding shawl. But it's about fictionalizing that creative process, and it's about telling stories, stories that are believable, stories that could be yours. They could be mine. They could be ours.
I really like your emphasis on unlearning. There's this great article by theorist Reed Rogoff, and it's called "What is a Theorist?" And in it, she talks about the importance of unlearning. And you know, that's not an easy thing to do, but I think that it's something to aspire towards constantly.
And to break down that hierarchy of education. A lot of people react and say, "What is a person with a doctorate doing in a classroom of children, primary school? What, you know, why do you?" You're too. I think that's absolute nonsense. I think it's absolute nonsense. The fact that I can, how I water that down and how I make that bite-sized, or how I kind of use that knowledge is really my thing. It's like, how do you do that as an educator? That's challenging, definitely, within the classrooms. When I started teaching little ones, I mean, there was nothing more frightening. I'd never experienced anything frightening than a room of children who are not, you know, who you can't talk to and discuss and rationalize things with. And it's just amazing. It was just such an amazing transformative process for me. And like I say, I think it all comes back. I mean, we are everything in that classroom, and we do, and I do extract whatever is relevant in terms of histories and cultural politics and and all of that, and making sure that there's a variety of stories in the classroom, that my lesson plans and my scheme of work, overall scheme of work is kind of looking at an array of communities and different sort of cultural approaches. And I think this is something that happens anyway, hopefully, within every classroom, but I think I'm just so much more passionate about it, and I'm so much more aware that this needs to happen. And primary schools also need to be, in many ways, kind of decolonized in terms of the literature and in terms of the stories that we're still teaching. Why on earth are we teaching them in today? I mean, that's another whole different conversation.
What's the lesson plan like in your class? Or what's the day like in your class?
Oh my God, it's so beautifully different every day. And it's the hours, it's the time before the class and after the class and the preparation and making sure that my learners come into the classroom and I know they're bringing in so much from home and from everything that's going on in their lives, and they come into this space, and I just want to make sure that that is a conducive, safe space where they can grow and they can, just develop develop character and compassion and really think about, all those vital 21st century skills that we want our children to have, and become critical thinkers.
I'm just seeing that Chief is encouraging people to post questions.
Okay.
It would be great if we can have some questions and
yeah, let's open it up.
I'm thinking too, since we have a fairly, tight group, that if people didn't want to type it in, but
yeah, I mean, let me see who's here. Adam Pong's here. He's my student. He's one of my students from my last school. Hi, Adam. Oh, bless him. He's saying hello.
Okay, it's a question from Clifford. Could you explain the significance of the robe and the shawl in the exhibition?
Yeah, hi, Clifford. I guess there's so much to be said about the color, the color pink and what that signifies, and the dilution of red, and even a lot of folklore around beetroot. They say that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the folklores that I read, something to the effect of if you both eat a beetroot together, you fall in love or something like that. So there's a whole multitude of stories around the beetroot. But pink is associated with weddings, with unions, with all of that. So for me, I was really looking at this, but it was also just a metaphor for just desiring any one particular thing and just constantly searching for that in everything you look at. And of course, there's the whole symbolism of color, and there's a lot of stuff written about dream analysis and color, and when you see certain colors, what those mean. So I think a lot of influences, really, my personal influences, went into that choice of, that shawl and the robe.
Okay, this Linda says that she's really enjoying your reflections, and she's thanking you. And she has a question: Are the papers naturally dyed with bead?
No, they're not. But they're again. the circumstances within which the work was made didn't allow me to do that, but it was something I really did want to explore. I wanted to, because it is, you're very right, Linda, it is something that is used in natural organic dyes as well. And ideally, I would have loved to have done that, but no, it's not, sadly.
Okay, what was your vision for a possible originally filmed version of this exhibition project? You mentioned animation, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, stop motion, animation, illustrations. Again, I draw a lot in the classroom. Like, I tend to draw with my learners. Whenever they're drawing, I'm drawing as well with them. So I think drawings was, I remember speaking to Aisha very early on. And in fact, initially I had, said to myself, this is a show about drawings. I want to do my drawings. And I know some people here have heard me say that, but it didn't, unfortunately, it wasn't that show. But maybe that's to come. But yeah, I'm really excited about the idea of collaboration through publication, illustrators, animators, filmmakers. I think really this is a dream for me, just to see this book, come to fruition, and be in classrooms. I just think it's something that would be worth pursuing for me.
Interesting. Collaboration is another great kind of way to describe what you do. Again, the ruse of seeing your face might appear as if that's not the case, but it really is at the core of what you do in so many ways, whether the collaborator is the viewer or someone on sort of the inside helping you with the production of the work.
Absolutely. And I think those really become such beautiful friendships, and that sometimes the idea of collaborators sounds too formal. I recognize the amount of generosity and creative input that my friends and my people that I've met have contributed to my practice, and I absolutely do not stand alone and take ownership of, this is my work. I don't really think of it like that. I think it is our work. It is all about all of those people. Certainly those people, some of those people have contributed in reading this story, and they know who they are and how much those relationships shaped my practice. So I'm very grateful and appreciative of that.
It's an interesting question. How many languages and variations has the story been translated into so far?
Oh, so many. Malayalam, Kannada, Tamil, Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, French, Dutch, Swedish, Lithuanian. Am I forgetting? So many, and then so many accents and so many dialects, which and different sort of age groups and genders as well. In terms of just there's such a beautiful diversity around the readers and their stories. I say they stories. It is their story.
Okay, this is a question from Adam. Has being a teacher shifted your attitude towards your work? And if so, how?
Yeah, completely. Adam, absolutely. You know that. You should say something, because you're firsthand. You're a witness to the classroom. So unmute yourself. So what was your experience of being in my classroom, Adam? I'll put you on the spot. Just remember your life.
I was like 14 when you became my teacher, but I felt like, well, first of all, you really established a strong sense of equity. There was no hierarchy. It wasn't teacher and student. It was us learning along with you, and you learn from us, and it was very symbiotic in that way. And I think, well, I mean, you know this, but you were the person that got me to art in the first place. So I have to give you credit for that. But I felt like you sort of propelled me into this whole new world that I didn't even know I wanted to enter before you introduced me to it, if that makes sense. So I just want to know if that experience has affected your work.
Absolutely. I mean, like you're saying, Adam, just watching you work, I was thinking about how much I could learn from that, from everything that you were doing. I was astounded by the talent, the raw talent that you had and what you were doing in the classroom. That just seeing your development, I think, kind of makes me, first of all, very proud of you and what you've achieved, but also allows me to reflect on my practice and what I'm doing. And I think it doesn't matter what stage of life you're at. I think we're all existing in the same time. And I think if we can recognize that and we can try and share and communicate these ideas. I mean, this whole idea of intergenerational dialogue is there. We don't call it intergenerational dialogue in a classroom, but that's exactly what's happening. It's one generation. Sadly, in not always, but a lot of times it's very teacher centric, and it's very much talking at your learners. And I wanted to try and just create that space where we can talk to one another, and we can, and I can navigate around my learners and what their needs are and where they're at, rather than me making sure that that this is what I want to teach and this is what you're going to learn. And I think, that sort of project-based idea of teaching, that let's all come together and let's all try and figure this out together. And then I think that also, of course, outside of the classroom in my own art practice, I mean, it started to make me think about art ownership, equity, creative ownership, all of those things, and also the kind of communities as well, the art communities that I was in. And my language had changed. The way that I was articulating my work had changed. The way I was talking about myself had changed. So yeah, so that's definitely, it has changed my attitude.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
So nice that you have one of your former students here.
No.
This is a question from Vincent, who I'm looking forward to working with at Tyler School of Art. This question is, do you find that whenever the story is translated into new language, any meanings are changed or lost in this translation?
Absolutely. I was noticing that. That was something that I was really, picking up on. The way that the dyer's relationship to the old man shifted a lot. There was a very, it was a very non-negotiable dyer at one point, and then there was some more sympathetic dyers, and then there were, and the prince as well. There was a lot of shift in those kind of nuances of character as well within those three characters. And I think that really came through in some of the translations, definitely.
What I found so interesting when I was listening to some of these translations is what was gained, like not lost, but so much like what something new happened that what couldn't have happened or didn't happen in one of the other languages, dialects, that I found really exciting. So it wasn't so much about always loss, but sometimes gaining something really. Oh,
absolutely. There was just layers and layers, and like I say, textures. Each language brought a different texture, different rhythm, different pace, and even within the same language, there were different translations of Urdu. There were different translations of Punjabi. Then there was the same translation, but the manner in which that it was recited and rendered was very different. The gender dynamics as well sort of shifted. Like I say, who tells the story? It sort of starts to, they populate it in some form capacity.
Okay, I think Atif's asking me about my own work and research in my book Productive Failure, which gels a lot with Qasim's work and its place in art history. Can you say something about possible intersections there? There definitely are, but I'm not sure if I want to put words to it quite yet because of our earlier discussion. But I mean, I should say to everybody that, you know, I first came across Qasim's work in 2006 or 7 in Manchester when I was in graduate school there. And I think only now I'm catching on and feel like I can begin to, you know, kind of work with your, work with your artworks with language. Like that, it's you know, it's been great seeing your work over time. But there's so much that was there that took me a while to, I think, really even see, which makes a great artwork for sure. Yeah, so I mean, I guess maybe the one kind of one thing that's I think important to me is just this idea of there's always another story. Like I'm very interested in producing an art history that is only meant to generate more art histories instead of being, you know, the final art history. And in fact, a friend of mine, the curator Yasmin Siddiqui, and I are co-editing a book called Storytellers of Art History, and it's coming out in January. And the whole idea is, you know, who are these art historians writing these things? What are their stories? Who, you know, we don't know. So it's an opportunity to get to know some of these voices, and to, again, just to make it so clear that art histories are stories. They are, and they're, you know, there's no sort of fixed truth to them, and the more we understand that, the better.
And just going back to this thing about color, that seems to have come up quite a lot. You've got to remember that, you know, the colonial project, the imperial project, really did shape the way that we dressed ourselves and the colors that we wore, and how those colors sort of changed meaning, and collected connotations. I think pink is queer in certain realms, but pink is not queer in others. Wearing, you know, loose, fluid clothing in certain cultures is not queer. It's the norm. So I think when we are looking at work, you know, which lens are we looking at it with? I mean, I know that we're all very aware of the term Orientalism, and we're all sort of fighting sort of against it, and making sure that we're not being Orientalist when we're thinking about, but I question whether it's just maybe just changed its hue. You know, is it, you know, how is it different now when somebody engages with that wedding shawl and looks at it for the craft, or for the sort of the kind of the connotations of it being exotic or authentic, or, you know, from where is it? Is it from Pakistan, or is it from India? Is it from the motherland? You know, is it something that's been transported? You know, so I think those questions are there. I'm not saying that they're, you know, these things that we don't necessarily we don't need to think about, but what I'm saying is that we've got to be aware of the way that we look at cultural artifacts, the way that we understand dance, classical Indian dance, whatever that is. And when we think about that, you know, at which point of history are we honing in on? You know, which dance are we talking about exactly? You know, and if we're going down the route of the origins narrative, then that's a dangerous one. If we're looking at the way it's evolved during the colonial project, pre and just post independence, and the way that was then kind of sort of looked at within another kind of a lens. So we just have to be aware of the way things are, the way we read, you know, and I just think that really, for me, is important.
It's a comment from Linda. She says, Qasim, your comment about story and language reminded me of this African proverb: until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Linda. And the thing is, my work with source communities, it was very much about putting that, the camera or whatever power that an artist was bringing to a source community. I wanted to kind of look at that power and negotiate that and see whether that can be, you know, that can be kind of reversed in some way, or at best reversed, or maybe, you know, modified, or, like I say, that awareness of what's happening is really important. The idea of the finished piece being blessed by source communities. And I know I use this word carefully, but, you know, the idea of giving it validation, giving it its blessings, and saying, okay, now, yes, you can take it, rather than take that material, go back to a studio elsewhere from in a very different cultural landscape, create the work, show the work, and then there's no relationship to the sort of the content generators, the people who you've worked with, you know, the source community. There's no relationship. And I think it's, for me, it was so important to make sure that any source community that I was working with were absolutely involved in the curation, the making, the process, the final work, and then and being there at the opening as well, because I had, you know, the work I did in the Red Light District in Lahore, there was an opening there of the work before it went to Manchester, and it was blessed in the way that, you know, a ceremony would be. So I think that kind of that's kind of really important, I think.
Okay, Adam has a interesting question. Yeah, you mentioned that your work is not inherently autobiographical, but I can't help but see hints of you in The Old Man. Did you draw from life experiences, anecdotes during the creation of the work?
I think we embody, I mean, I think, yeah, we're very porous. We're very porous, and we do take on things. I mean, we're very easily influenced. We are nothing but influences. You know, nobody's original. Nobody's, you know, created something for the first time. So if we acknowledge our, you know, the fact that we're so porous and that we have body memory, that we have, you know, we absorb information, and sometimes consciously, subconsciously, it's there. Yes, of course, you know, I can be, but I personally related most to the cloth dyer, so I'm not really sure if I was the old man or the prince, but, you know, I was certainly the cloth dyer, because I was always just engaged in this idea of, you know, this whole idea of to be colored in somebody else's hue, you know, to be the one who is coloring, to erasing and coloring. I find that process much more exciting than, you know, the prince or the old man. So yeah, if there was anybody, I think I'd relate to the dyer the most.
All right, I think we have time for one more question if anybody would like to pose one. This is the time to do it. And what time is it now over there for you, Qasim? Like you? Oh,
it's way past.
You wouldn't know it from
no.
You're engaging with us, which is really generous. You have to thank you.
I mean, I would just like to, I would just like to again thank all my contributors for these beautiful renditions and for inhabiting and populating these stories. I just really hope that the project grows and becomes something quite special and collective and meaningful to everybody who participates in the project. So and thank you again to Atif and Aisha and yourself and Athira as well, who's been so actively involved in the exhibition. Thank you so much. And for everybody who's here listening.
Thank you everyone so much. And Atif has a message for everybody. This was amazing. I'm glad this is recorded because there's just so much exciting things that you've brought to our attention to, it's going to take some while to really kind of, I think, absorb. But thank you everybody. And Atif, if you don't have anything else to add, I can say goodbye for you. Okay, all right. Okay, well, thank you everyone. Atif.
I just wanted to come and say thank you. This has been a wonderful time. Actually living with this exhibition has been wonderful, beautiful. Thank you, Alpesh, and thank you, Qasim, and thank you, for being here.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.